This is Stigma, where we talk with leaders from many industries about how mental health and addiction have impacted their lives. Many people suffer silently from mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma. They never seek help because of stigma. In this podcast, host Stephen Hayes and his guests share their stories of recovery in order to encourage others to do the same. Here's Stephen.
Our guest today, Scotty Tidwell, is someone that I first met via a Twitter argument about SEC football. And the funny thing is that our argument was broken up by someone else I met arguing on Twitter about SEC versus Big Ten football. And that person, that's how I met that person. I ended up funding their early stage business, and they've gone on to raise a ton of money. And it's funny how the world works. So, Scotty has a great deal of entrepreneurial operating experience, ranging from, chief marketing officer roles at several companies to CEO. And, much of that experience has been in the esports space. And he's basically, I spent some time in the esports space. He's basically the go-to marketing guy in esports. If you're going to build in the space and you need to do marketing, he's on your short list for CMO or for whatever else it is that you're doing. So he's currently the chief community officer for GFuel, which is basically the official energy drink of esports for those non-esports listeners out there. And you can connect directly with Scotty via his Twitter, which I'll link in the show notes, but it's at Scotty Tidwell, 2 T's, 2 L's. And Scotty, welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Stephen, man. How are you?
Great. Just
Great.
Pretty fired up about this conversation. I think it's going to be a good one.
Me too, and I just want to say first and foremost, I appreciate what you're doing in the space now. And I really do appreciate you drawing the, some light or the best light that you can to mental health. This conversation is going to be tough for me because I have personally struggled in some areas, and, this is, off the cuff. No holds barred. I'm going to be open, honest, and talk about all the mental problems that I've seen in my life or I've had in my life and how that has impacted me as a person, me as an employee, me as a, now ex-husband and all those things.
Yeah, that's what this podcast is about. I mean, if anything comes of this podcast, if a few people out there are impacted to the point where they will share their story or ask for help if they need it, man, we hit a home run. So that's all we're asking for.
It's funny hearing you saying that. I'm looking at my arm. I have goosebumps, and it's not from podcast or being nervous. It's about over the past, I want to say 3 or 4 years, I've had at least 4 close friends that have either killed themselves on purpose or in basically a drug overdose, which is on purpose. And, it was tough to watch. It was tough to see happen. And these are successful guys, either, they were married, had children. And it's like you stroll your Facebook feed like once a week or every few days like I do. And it's like, oh, man, that's terrible. And then your heart sinks. It's like, hey, that guy's the same age I am, early 40s, great life, great career. And it's like, why? Why did he do it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questions that come from when someone takes their life. There's a lot of questions around mental health. And I just kind of wanted to ask you, when you think of mental health, super high level, what do the words mental health even kind of mean to you?
To me, and 10 years ago, I'd have answered this question way differently. But to me, it's mental health. To me, at a high level, means your personal happiness. Right? Are you happy with who you are as a person when you look yourself in the mirror? Start from the basic things like, are you happy with yourself and how you act? Are you happy with yourself and in your career? Are you happy with yourself in your love relationships? All those type of things. So at a high level for me, mental health is your day to day. People talk about the journey. When I get here, this will be great. Or if I can just get there, this will be great. But the everyday grind, it wears on people. Relationships get strained, and I think all those things, those worldly things that we have to kind of compete in relationships, compete for status, for, jobs, all these things, but we do naturally without even thinking about it. I think, it starts to really have a drain on your overall mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And would you say, I know you mentioned this earlier on, so how would you say that mental health has impacted your life? I mean, what, other than what you mentioned briefly before, how has it touched you?
So, for me, I go back to being a kid. I was born in the 70s, typical father mom thing. My dad was, working all the time, always gone. So during the school week, I would be at school and wouldn't see him most of the weeks till the weekend. And that was tough. And then, my dad had a drinking problem. And then, my mom at the time, she was a stay-at-home mom because, that's kind of what he wanted. And my mom was an angel, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have her in my life, but my mom was an angel and she protected me from a lot of the stuff that was going on, and then finally, I want to say I was about 9 years old. Is that the first time I saw, like true physical violence, in their relationship. And then I think that was probably the first time I actually saw my dad like really drunk. And for me, it's like, wow, why is, 19 years old? Wow, what is going on? This is weird. And like, why is my mom screaming? And why is my dad acting the way he is? And so for me, that was like my first glimpse of what's wrong with my dad? Why is he doing these things? And so, fast forward, a couple of years, a divorce happens, and then my dad, he got even worse because of the divorce. And so watching your dad just completely turn his back on me rather, that was tough. I'd reach out. He was supposed to get me every the weekend. And usually the weekends that I went with him, I was staying with his friends,
Yeah.
And they were like protecting me from him almost, if that makes sense. And it was a tough childhood, but raised by basically a single mom from the time I was 10 years old. And it was tough, but it was it wasn't until I was later on, like 19, 20, that I realized what my mother had done for me. And, things were going bad and she kind of protected me, if you will, from that ugly side of mental health is when people come unraveled. And to this day, I still try to reach out to my real father and have a relationship. And I have most of my life, but it's just not going to happen, and sadly, I'm not sure what it was that led up to him mentally breaking, if you will. And I'm not sure I'll ever know.
I mean, that's pretty heavy. How did you feel about that when you saw your dad that way as a child and then later in life and then now, and how have those feelings changed? If they have.
So for me, well, it's one of those things like for the podcast, I said my dad. As an adult, I can think of maybe 3 occasions in my life with my real father that I could consider him a dad. So this impacted me a ton. So I have 3 children, and for me, seeing that, it's like, okay, I'm gonna be the best dad possible. I'm gonna like constantly, and I went overboard, right? There's a lot of stuff I didn't have growing up, and obviously a dad was one of them. And I kind of, for me mentally, it's like, well, hey, I can compensate for what I didn't have by like giving them the world and try not to be mean. And so there was times where I was very relaxed on like discipline issues because it's in my head. It's like, well, I don't want to act like my dad. So I went from one extreme to the other, and I don't think that was a good idea. And the kids turned out great. At 2, my daughter has her associates. My oldest son is just about done with his associates. And then I got a 15-year-old who, as a freshman in high school, he was taking AP classes. Really, really smart kids, but it's one of those things. It's like, hey, was I a great parent? Did seeing that mentally make me make mistakes, if you will? Did I go overboard? So, it's had a lot of mental health for me is important now more than ever. And, as I try to clear my head and say, okay, critique myself, right? Everybody wants to critique themselves. And I've done that a lot in my personal life as well.
So you said mental health is really important to you. And one of the things I like to ask people is, would you say that you are proactive about your mental health or are you more reactive to it?
I want to say for the first 41 years of my life, I was reactive. As of about, I want to say 14 months ago, I made a decision to, hey, I feel I don't know if it was anxiety, but I felt like I was trapped in my own world and I didn't have an avenue to vent, right? And you know yourself, even in business, when you work in startups like we both have and all that stuff that goes with, being an entrepreneur, you spend so much time with people who are coworkers and you become great friends. But sometimes for me, I never could take that friendship in the workspace and just completely talk like I am now to you. I couldn't do that. It's like I was ashamed to talk about the things that like felt like it made me trapped in my own world, if that makes sense. So, 14 months ago, I said, enough's enough. I'm going to put my happiness and the things that I want to achieve in life. And when I say achieve, it's like not outside of business achieve. I want to put the things that put my own well-being first for once, and I did that and it upset a lot of people. But at the end of the day, it's like people can judge you from afar, but they're doing so without having any clue what's going on mentally and, with you as a person internally. And that was probably the hardest part for me is, okay, I'm crying out for help. And instead of getting help, people want to throw stones. And so I think when it comes to like, are you reacting? Are you being proactive? I think honestly, that's why a lot of people are not proactive, is because they know the moment they kind of put themselves first and they start worrying about their own well-being first, people will start to throw stones and question, well, why are you doing this? Or why are you doing that? Or why don't you help here? And why don't so for me, I think that's why a lot of people don't put their mental well-being first. They're worried about stones being casted at them.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned, in my journey, is that worry about what other people think,
Yep.
that's part of the problem. That's part of the mental illness. That's part of the boundary system and the self-esteem that we lack. I lacked it most of my life.
Yeah. And that's one thing, talking about how we met, and you came across as very confident, and I like that. I like people that are confident in their knowledge and what they do. And especially when it comes to college football. And, we had we had great back and forth, but, watching you as a person and I appreciate you sharing, your journey and what you went through with me and then publicly as well. I can sit here and say on this podcast, I'm very proud of you because, somebody in your stature within the industry, in the business world, to me, that's super rare. And I think by you coming out and saying, hey, all right, let's clear the air. This is Steven. Here's my faults. I'm going to work to correct them. I think that's huge. And I hope more people like gravitate toward that and understand that, hey, guess what? I watched a lot of people throw rocks, but guess what? You wasn't worried about the people throwing the rocks. And so now you're in a better place for that. And I think that's the key thing is like, you have to come to terms. I don't care what anybody says. I have to put my mental stability and my mental health first. If I don't, it'll kill me. Right. To me, it's that serious.
There's no doubt about it. It's that serious.
Yeah.
I long story short, I know a lot of researchers that are working diligently to prove the connection between some of the leading causes of death on this planet and depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
And, there's not been a lot of work done there, but there's been some, and there's definitely a connection. I think depression, anxiety, mental health, it's a much bigger killer than people think. I think a lot of people say, well, suicide's up. It ranks here on the list of reasons why people die, but it's not just suicide.
Yeah. And, I think when the way you said that's perfect because it ties into how some of my friends died. These were people that went to a doctor with an ailment or injury or something like that. And I'll talk about addiction, when the time comes for me personally, but you had people that went to the doctor writes a script. Here you go, buddy. Take these, you'll be good. And it's some off the wall painkiller like Tramadol, which now is like, I think the leading cause of death in this country. Maybe, Tramadol was a bad drug. I personally, after 3 major surgeries, orthopedic surgeries, I was addicted to Tramadol. And it was hard because it's like, in the business world, I have to function every day at a high level, usually dealing with public facing stuff. And the doctors kept wanting to prescribe more and more heavier drugs. I mean, if I completely gave the doctor his way, I'd have been taking Loratab and Lyrica and all this other junk. And I'm like, I can't function like that. So it's like, well, hey, take Tramadol. It's no big deal. It's not as strong. And then that cycle was terrible. And finally, one day, I'm like, I have enough of that. I can't. I quit all my prescription drugs cold turkey. And I think that's one of the defining moments in my life was like, listen, doctors know best when it comes to your health, but there's something seriously wrong with me as a person. How that when you're addicted to something, and I say something, I think you can be really addicted to anything. The term like drug of choice, and I think in that reference, you're not actually referring to a drug. It's how your brain perceives the chemical reaction to you getting relief or satisfaction to whatever it is, right? I think at least. And so for me, it's like I'm done with the Tramadol. I have to function better as a person. I have to be better in business, and I have to be better, strategically in my thinking. I can't have a cloudy head. And so then look, fast forward many years later, and this not constant on Facebook, so-and-so passed away. And I'm like, in his sleep, I'm like, wait, what happened? And then you find out, well, he's been on Tramadol for a year and a half. And on this so happened on Friday night, he had, a couple cocktails. And next thing you know, it's kind of ruled a suicide, but actually, no, he had a few drinks when he shouldn't have had the drinks, but he had the drinks because in his mind, the Tramadol is not a strong drug and it doesn't really affect him very much.
Yeah.
And so next thing you know, he dies in his sleep, cardiac arrest, or stops breathing, whatever the medical term is. And it's like, he didn't commit suicide. He just went and booked a vacation for him and his wife and his kids.
Right.
So that's been tough to see.
Yeah. I mean, addiction's tough. We all have pain. I know for me, I had a lot of pain and I tried to numb it. And when I numbed it, I became ignorant of what was really going on in my own life. And that ignorance led me to, down into dark places. And, and the way to deal with it is to deal with the cause, which is the thing that made you feel bad, which is the thing that caused you trauma or sadness or grief or pain or whatever.
And I know this, not try to tie into this if I can. I know it's way out in left field, but I think if somebody researched the historical data on, this type of, addiction problems and depression, I don't know how far back the research goes, but for me, I think it comes down to, I think a lot of it has to do with a healthy lifestyle. When I was really at my worst is when I was at my heaviest in terms of body weight. I'm 6 foot tall. And at that time, to tie this all in 2011, my stepfather, who I considered my real dad, my father, was a true father figure to me. And my best friend was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And they said, you probably have 3 months. And he went through, did the Whipple procedure. He was a candidate for that because he was always in the best shape of his life. Like in his 40, he was doing triathlons and stuff in his late 40s. And so he was a candidate for that procedure, and he went through that, went through the chemo and had, and then you fast forward and he's basically somewhat cancer-free after about 12 months, and then the cancer comes back and he finally dies in June 2013. And so for me, I really started putting on weight when he was diagnosed, and I got up to like 267 pounds, and that's 267. Like it took me 20 something minutes to walk a mile. I couldn't pick up 135 pounds on a deadlift at that weight. And I was way out of shape. I was working at the time for Stuff Gaming as a startup, and Duncan Ironmonger, the founder and CEO, we were really close because we worked together every day for 18 hours, it seemed. He would tell me, hey, take all the time you need. And so I was able to be with my dad as much as I could working off a laptop, but I just, between the laptop and working and sitting with him, I gained a ton of weight eating terrible junk food. And I feel like that because of my physical health and my diet, no exercise, I think all that kind of tied in and just snowballed it's like a hockey stick company, except a bad way. And I was the company, it just snowballed into something that was out of control. And I think because of the terrible diet and the weight gain and no exercise, I think mentally it just got worse for me. Then seeing him and a loved one in that condition, and that's kind of when I just snapped cold turkey. I'm like, if I don't change, this will be bad.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of research that's being done right now on the connection between mental health, mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, bipolar, and cancer, and our gut and
Yep.
our physical well being. So there's been a lot of good conclusions and interesting conclusions, but still a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah.
And one of the just a little plug, but one of the guys that leads that research at UT Southwestern here in Dallas, where I live, is on the board of my fund, and he's just, I mean, the things he could tell you about what's coming, it's almost like the cavalry are coming for mental health.
I hope so.
With the research that's being done right now.
Yeah, I really hope so, because it impacts. I mean, and it's not just we're in our 40s. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. You might be 35, Stephen. You look great.
I'm a few months short,
Yeah,
but I'm almost
right.
there.
So I think we see the world differently than we did 10 years ago. I think that's just part of growing through life and growing as a person. But I really hope the cavalry's coming, because I see a lot of people young. I see teenagers. I work in the industry where the age demographic skews way younger, than having 3 kids of my own. So I feel like I'm in the loop with the youth of America. But I see like almost like a storm coming, because, when I go out on the town or I go out to a movie or whatever, everybody's in their phones. And it's like, okay, are you in your phone because you feel safe, mentally safe to be in your phone? Is your anxiety high? So you're in your phone because it calms you? I feel like social anxiety is ramping up like I at an all-time high, I'm assuming, because you just watch people at gaming events and whatnot, and people cling to their phone like a lifeline. And it's like, is the social media part, is it making that anxiety or worse? Is it making people just succumb to the, oh my goodness, I'm not used to this because I'm always on my phone, or I'm always on my gaming rig or station streaming or what have you. So I think that's one thing that worries me as a father of 3 kids.
Yeah. Well, it's addiction. And
Yep.
there was legislation announced. When was it? Today or yesterday? 3 days ago. It was this week. A senator from Missouri put a bill in to play that's going to take aim at certain features of social media that were designed to be addictive. That's
Right.
quote directly from the legislation. And I'm not a politician, and I don't care about right or left, but this is not the first time I've read lately that Congress is fixated on going to the social media companies and basically saying, Surgeon General's warning, you're bad for people, kind of like cigarettes. And and so that leads me to another question, which is, guess who's right behind them? It's the game makers. So that brings me to a question, which is, what is the dialogue these days from your perspective in the gaming and esports community around mental health and how it relates to gaming?
Yeah. For me personally, I've tried to stay well connected into anything that has to do with gaming and esports. Whether, I try to keep, my finger on the pulse, because that's what I do, right? If I don't have my finger on the pulse, I don't have the ability to do the best job that I can for the brand, right? And looking at it, it seems like nobody talks about it unless something bad happens and somebody passes away, somebody kills himself. And then the engagement around mental health shoots up. And 3 days later, there's crickets. There's no talk of it. So for me personally, I don't see a lot of any sort of literature coming out or anything from publishers or developers trying to steer people in the right direction when it comes to how much time they spend consuming content, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on YouTube or Twitch. And then the notifications, right? How does notifications play in with smartphones? And people are always connected, and then you couple all that, I think, with there's really no decent guidelines that are backed up by research to help you understand what's healthy and what's not healthy. I think that's what it comes down to, is how much time doing something is considered healthy? And then at what point do you get past that healthy mark into like this danger zone, if you will?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was thinking about this earlier today. When I grew up in the early '80s playing Super Mario Brothers, my parents would say, or I'd be playing Zelda till 3 a.m, and my parents would say, "Hey, that's bad for your eyes," or "Yeah, that makes your mood drop," or "makes you moody,"
Yeah.
or that encourages violence. And my reaction, and
Yeah.
has been most of my life, even up until the last few years, was kind of like, come on. But I don't know that there's any science on that. I'm sure there is, but it there's just my question and my problem around gaming is that I know that it's addictive. And so whether it changes my mood or whatever it does or doesn't do, I know that sitting in that chair and going into a place where I'm not thinking about my current reality, that right there, that's addiction. That creates a dopamine release that makes me not think about the fact that I didn't like what happened today.
Yeah. And for me personally, even in the startup world, for so many years, when I got done working, right? And I say if I ever got done working, because I was always online, but when it came time for like me time, the me time activity wasn't something that was physically or mentally healthy for me. So if I closed the work laptop at 10 p.m., I got online and I played video games till 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. And then I'm up, showered, worked out on the computer by 7 or 30 or 8, working again. And so that vicious cycle for me continued probably 3 years straight. That was my day. And it got to the point where I wasn't looking forward to being done with work to relax. I was looking forward to being done with work to game. And I love video games. Don't get me wrong. I love gaming. I love esports. I think it's wonderful. But I think you got to set boundaries, right? And even for the professional esports players, you have to set boundaries because I see these guys and girls. They say they're practicing for 12 hours a day. I'm sorry. I don't think Tiger Woods even hits golf balls for 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And
His
so
back
in
would break in half.
and so in the yeah, so in like, the repetition, and even no matter what you do, if you're constantly doing it for 10, 12 hours a day, you're going to have some bad side effects, either more than likely mentally for sure, and physically. Even as a gamer, you're going to have physical problems with the repetition. So it's like I see a few companies here or there talking about practicing and coaching. And it's like me, I was almost a scratch golfer out of high school. I played a ton, but when I was younger, I just played just to play. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized, you need to have structured practice. You can't just do it 12 hours a day and that automatically makes you better than the person that only does it 6. That's not how it works. So for me, I want to see in esports specifically, I would love to see better structure because, I coached youth football, baseball, and basketball for over a decade. And for me, my practices were very structured. There was a purpose to everything we did. So imagine you go to the driving range, right? You go to the driving range and we're practicing our long game. Well, if we just aim toward the middle of the driving range, that's not good practice. So we have to practice like we play and practice tougher than the games are. So for me, once I learned how to practice and actually practice properly in golf, that's when I got better. And oh, by the way, that's when the amount of time I was investing shrunk. And I think that's important for esports is like, you don't have to play 12 hours a day to be the best. You need to have really concise and focused practice and then do something healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Nice.
And just to circle back on something from earlier in that topic is that there are startups that I'm looking at right now that they can use the camera on your PC to, in the background, they can track your mood based on facial recognition and some machine learning technologies they're applying. And what I would tell you is right now, those startups are focused on showing how much Facebook and social media platforms impact your mood when you use them. But I can tell you that they are squarely focused on the game makers. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I'm curious, is there anybody out there in the gaming community that's kind of leading the charge on the mental health conversation, because I feel like if the game makers don't step up right now and do something proactive about mental health, that they're going to be in front of Congress and they're going to have something mandated upon them.
You know what? I can go along with that, because when you think about traditional sports, right, you don't see LeBron James practicing basketball 12 hours a day. The professional athletes, they run on a schedule. They have very, very focused practices, right? Everything that they do is a purpose behind it, even down to the timing when they eat their food and what food they eat. Everything has a purpose. And I feel like, you can't, you look at the NFL and the NBA and baseball. People talk about Barry Bonds and everybody else juicing, right? Well, you play 162, 65 games a year. What does that do to your body? And so the same thing about gaming and esports. Like, you play that much and it's not structured, right? You don't have structured practices. You don't have set windows for practice. And then you're just, if you don't, I think it's coming. I think you're going to see a focus, maybe not the next 2 years, but soon, especially now that you have the professional leagues are being set up like Overwatch World League, and it's geo based on cities. They've invested a ton of money into it. I wouldn't be surprised, within the next year or two, if Activision Blizzard doesn't come out and say, hey, Overwatch World League, this is the maximum amount of time you can play practice a week.
I mean, I would be absolutely shocked and appalled if they didn't do that any day. I mean, that's a minimum amount of effort that they should be making. And I mean, I don't hear it, but maybe you hear it. I don't see someone leading the charge on the conversation.
No, there's not. I mean, well, I mean, honestly, I've seen and heard more from you in just the past week or so than I have from anybody else in 9-10 years in the space.
Well, that's going to have to change.
Yeah.
How do we advance the topic of awareness and well-being and mental health in the gaming community? I mean, because you know how it is. You know how toxic the community is. You know what it's like in League of Legends chat. I mean, it's a toxic community. And I mean, is that evident of a community that's not interested in well-being?
I think it reflects on a community that doesn't know enough to even be concerned. I think it comes down to education and awareness, and it's sort of like a tragedy you hear on TV, right? You see it and like, oh man, that's terrible. Doesn't affect me. Don't care. Whatever. And I think that's how the gaming space is too. I mean, no matter where you go, you can find the most toxic stuff on the internet around gaming and esports. And I think something's going to have to give. I hope it's not another tragedy. I hope it's not another famous person that succumbed to the constant abuse or backlash or the rock throwing, right? And I hope that doesn't happen. But sadly, I think it's going to take somebody prominent to ends up killing themselves. And I think that's what's going to happen before something. And I say somebody, I mean in the esports space, who's a professional player. I think it's going to take something like that before people even really start to think about it. And that's sad, because there's a lot of people out there suffering right now and they're scared to admit it.
I mean, if you think about the stats, you say a lot of people are suffering. The stats are 1 in 5 in the US have a mental illness, and that stat is low because of the quality of the data. So that means the odds are there's somebody on every LCS team that's got a mental illness.
Is that not staggering when you put it like that? That is staggering.
Yeah.
It's staggering.
That's what it is every time I turn in to watch, there's 2 people on stage with a diagnosable illness, and probably more that have some sort of something else going on.
That is insane.
It's crazy, right? So, yeah.
When regards to, especially now around esports organizations, there's more funding now available, and so many teams have been funded very well. You see teams building out practice and home complexes to eventually they want to run their headquarters and have everything's a purpose within the HQ, right? And you see some teams that bring on, personal trainers to help with the physical health of the athlete, the esports professional, right? But you never see any mental coaches brought on. You never see any therapists. You never hear about an esports professional team that hires a therapist to just help understand the well-being of their assets. We're talking about human capital, right? Makes the world go round.
Yeah, and I mean, how easy would it be to just give all your players a
Yeah,
Talkspace account
remotely.
and let them do it remotely digitally? I mean, so what that tells me is it's not a cost issue. It's just a lack of awareness and not caring. That's the problem.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's a few people that that own esports orgs that I've been friends with for a long time. They're really great people. And in those few cases, I think it's not so much that they don't care, it's so much that it's not on their radar because for whatever reason, it really hasn't impacted them potentially. And I say potentially, I might be speaking erroneously, but I think that's the problem is it's not on their radar. Out of sight, out of mind, don't think about it. But, given the statistics you just gave, I think it should be on every owner's mind.
Yeah. So kind of bringing that to full circle, what kind of tools or resources do you think are needed for not just gamers, but for everybody to improve their mental health? And maybe a better way to ask that is, what tools would you like to have or that don't exist that you can think of that would be helpful?
One of the things, and when iPhone came out with the whole the feature that showed screen time, right? And so you could get a summary, like daily summary and a weekly summary of just how many times you picked your phone up, how many notifications, how much time you spent on each application on your phone. It wasn't until that update that I ever thought about notifications and how many I got. And when I saw that, I was blown away. I'm like, wow, I picked my phone up how many times a day? I'm on, and it's like constant notifications. So me personally, unless you're one of 3 or 4 people, and I have special ringtones and special text notifications for those people, a lot of times I don't check my phone anymore. And I've gotten in the habit, especially in the morning, Stephen. I would used to wake up 5:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. The first thing I would do is pick my phone up because the alarm was on the phone and immediately start going through notifications that happened while I was sleeping. And that was probably the worst habit or addiction that I had is before I went to bed, go to sleep, I would literally lay there on my phone. I would find myself working, going through notifications right up until it's like time to pass out because I'm exhausted. I'd put my phone down. When I wake up, turn the alarm off, and then it's right back going through notifications. And what happened so many times, I would have a notification. You know how it is. You get a bad email, the timing on something you were working on for a campaigns got thrown off because ABC. And so now it's 5:30 and I should be happy and feeling great that I'm alive and breathing fresh air. Instead, I'm pissed off because of a work email or a notification or a family member did something stupid on Facebook. And honestly, for me, I have tried so hard to turn off all notifications for all apps, and I've tried to make a point where I have to get the phone detached from me. It's okay, Scotty, if you miss a call. It's okay, Scotty, if you don't reply to that Slack message. It's okay you don't send Stephen an email back within 5 minutes after getting it. And that's been the hardest thing for me, I think, is the phone, the always connected phone addiction. That's been one of the toughest ones. I was able to conquer the prescription drug addiction, whereas I'm done with that. But the phone addiction, that's been the toughest one because of social media, because of the notifications. You have companies that, like Facebook is the world's worst at this. They will send you a notification just so you have a notification, just so you open back up the app. Random notifications, like, for example, let's say you're trying to sell a barbecue grill, right? And you live in Dallas, Texas, and you find, it's like, I don't want to just give it away, but I'll put it on Facebook, one of these little communities, yard sale sites, right? And so then you get notifications for random stuff, and you got to cut the notifications out. and I've done a good job of it thus far. I still have a long ways to go. I've cut my screen time way down, probably 70%. I've cut my screen time down on smartphones, and I think that's important too. And I think it all ties in.
Yeah, I agree with you. And finally, I think stigma, the name of this podcast, I think stigma is really the ultimate problem.
Yeah.
It's really the thing that prevents team owners from doing anything. It's the thing that prevents people from asking for help or getting help. And what do you think that it will take to get more people talking about mental health and specifically talking about their own experiences? And I know earlier you talked about, I think something tragic will happen in the gaming industry and that'll get people talking, but maybe what could we do right now to get that conversation going so maybe that doesn't happen?
The conversation has to, we can't just have conversation around mental health when there's a tragedy. We have to have conversation around mental health every day, especially in the gaming and esports industry. It's important. You see so many instances of somebody doing something. It's like, wow, that's crazy. Or I mean, what caused that? And for me, one of the toughest things that I went through and seen firsthand was, a kid I coached in football. He was a great kid, all American parents. He went to Auburn University, was in the ROTC program there. Clean cut kid, smart, has a whole life in front of him. And I coached this kid for almost 10 years, knew him well. My oldest son and him were best friends. And one day I get a text from my oldest son, and he said his buddy killed himself. He was at a party on campus, shot himself in the head with his own gun in the middle of the party.
Wow.
And this was because of a breakup with a girl. For whatever reason, he couldn't get through it, and then there was issues, a lot of people laughing about it and people throwing stones. And this young, bright, great kid killed himself. And so we gotta somehow let people know you can't worry about what people think. You can't worry about people's reaction. And I mean this as sincere as possible. You cannot even worry about blood relatives' reactions. When I quit a job one time, and my mom, God bless my mother, she rode me for 5 days. Why would you quit that job? You're doing so great. You're making great money. You had a job people would kill for. I'm like, Mom, I hated it. But it's a great job. Mom, I hated it. It was not fulfilling. And so that's an example of we as a community and gamers and publishers and developers, we have to make it okay to talk about problems. And whether you can talk about it with friends on Twitter or Facebook or family, you got to talk about your problems with somebody. And me personally, I know I've had counseling before. I went to therapy before. It's so much easier when it shouldn't be. It's so much easier to talk to a complete stranger about your mental problems than it is blood family and close friends. And I think that has to change. People have to be comfortable. It's like, how do you get that mental strength to not worry about people throwing stones when you're already mentally compromised, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's gonna have to take a ton of education. It's gonna have to take it. We need community leaders. We need community and special content creators. We need people that are in high positions, different companies. We need people that high positions with developers, social media platforms. We need people of stature to come in, get on board with it, and start sharing the message. We can't wait till somebody kills himself and then there's 5,000 people posting the suicide hotline number.
Yeah.
That's not looking out for mental health, especially mental health of friends and family who you haven't checked in on. Check in on people.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard from somebody that you send them a message. Are you good? Do you need anything? You want to chat? And these are things that I've started doing more as I gotten older, is like I try to check in on people. I don't remember. I need to go back and look. I think there was, even with you, I checked in on you. It's like,
Yeah, you did. I remember.
and I'm like, hey, because I know what it's like to have stones thrown at you. And the problem is nobody had to tell Steven, nobody had to tell you what you were doing right or wrong. It's like when I was really overweight, you didn't have to tell me I'm fat. I saw it in the mirror every day. I didn't have to tell Steven, well, Steven, you did this wrong. No, he knows. The people that did something wrong, they know. They need support. They need to understand that, hey, I made a mistake. That mistake doesn't define you or me, right? The mistake doesn't change your life and make you a terrible person.
I would say that my mistake saved my life.
Right. You're absolutely right. I believe that with all my heart, 100%. Sometimes they say, what's the old term? And again, I'm not a super religious person, but they say about a lesson and a blessing. And, sometimes there's blessings in disguise. And sometimes that mountain you have to climb, you look back, you're glad you climbed it because it was only a pebble, right? I think things kind of happen for a reason. Call me crazy, but honestly, if it wouldn't have happened, this vicious cycle that you had going on in your life probably would have got worse.
I wouldn't have survived it. I had no chance.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not just my opinion. All my psychiatrists, everybody. I mean, the manic episodes will kill you.
Yeah. And based on what you told me in private, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
So I think, we have to, we as people, of stature in different communities and different industries and the gaming industry and publish, we have to get people that have large voices and large followings to push this issue, not once every 6 months, daily, weekly. We have to become a society where it's okay to be in a bad spot, but you got to talk it out. You need help. You need to vent. You need to find somebody to confide in. And even if that somebody is through a website or an app where you're chatting with somebody you do not know, and then you can completely get it off your chest. Because sometimes, and in my case, I'll say this, you feel like a terrible person and you feel like you've done something horrendous or you're a bad person or how I was addicted or this vicious cycle. But until you get it off your chest and a complete stranger says, you know what? That's not that bad. I mean, you can handle this. You can change. You're not defined by an alcohol problem. You're not defined by a pill problem or a gaming problem. That doesn't define you as a person. It's okay. But you have to get that off your chest. You have to have somebody that can help reel you in, so to speak, and provide feedback and give you an avenue to just breathe for a day,
Yeah. That's really powerful stuff. I mean, and I think that what you're telling me, and I feel like I'm starting to see a trend in this space that the solutions are pretty simple. Take a deep breath, have a conversation, be vulnerable. I mean, it's not rocket
That's the
science.
key. You summed it up with one word, I think. Vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right. We live in a society where we live in a world where social media, people see the best 3 seconds of somebody's life daily, right? You see people and influencers, photographs are staged. They're leaning up next to a Lambo that's not even theirs. All the usual stuff, right? People share 3 seconds, the best 3 seconds of their life, and then you are scrolling through your feed, and you feel like a loser, right? And then people start trying to judge themselves because naturally, I think human nature is to compete. Naturally, I think humans are competitive by nature. And so when you see that, it's like, well, I can't compete with that. I don't have the means or I don't have the ability or I don't have the education. And then we start viewing ourselves in a bad light based off of what somebody else shared that we don't even know in person. And we allow that to affect us and look at ourselves like we're not enough. At the end of the day, every single person is enough. Everybody has a special skill or trait or something valuable within them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, look, man, I mean, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on, chatting. I appreciate you opening up and being vulnerable and sharing about your experiences. And I mean, I don't know how to thank you enough. And I think that this conversation will hopefully help somebody.
And I hope so too. And again, if you're out there listening to this, my DMs are open on Twitter. I know it's dangerous to say that. You don't even have to follow me. I don't have to follow. Just send me a DM. If I think if you reach out to Steven, he's done way more research on this than I have. I'm glad he's a voice for this now. Lord knows we needed a voice for this, especially in the gaming space. And I hope more and more people of stature come on the show. And I hope they share their feelings, and I hope they're vulnerable. And I hope you feel, if you're a listener, I hope you feel that connection where you can, what, Steven's right or Scotty's right. I'm not worried about what people think. I need to talk this through with somebody, whether it's me or whoever. Reach out to somebody. Don't fight your battle alone. There's too many people out there that care for you to just sit there and tear yourself apart.
Yeah. So people can find you on Twitter at Scotty Tidwell. I'll put that in the show notes. Is there somewhere else that people should look for you?
The best way probably is Twitter. I mean, I do a little bit of LinkedIn. I used to write a blog. I don't have time for that no more. But like I said, if you're on Twitter, hit me up. And just reach out. I'm happy to chat, help. I've done it in the past. It's a tough subject, but I think we have to have more people talking about it.
Yeah. Well, look, man, I'm really honored to have you here, to have your support, and to have had your support privately as well. I think this conversation will be helpful to some people who are struggling. And I think this conversation will encourage someone else to share their story. And, the goal is for that elevated conversation around this topic of mental health to nudge somebody, one person at a time, towards asking for help if they need it, or
hey, you should take this as a moment for you. If what you're doing, if an hour episode, right? If 1 hour episode gets one person, just one person in this gaming space or in any industry, if it gets one person to reach out for help, it was all worth it, right?
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. So, man, that's the intent of this podcast. And, I just thank you for everyone who's listening. If you like the episode, obviously, shamelessly, please give us a like and a review and reach out to us directly. We want to hear from everyone. Reach out to us on Twitter, and we'll put all of the show and my personal contact information in the show notes. And I want to hear from people. Agree, disagree, want to hear more, want to hear less. You want to come on the show and say something about it? We're here. All we want to do is elevate the conversation around mental health. So that's what we're about.
Thank you for having me, Steven. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, man. That was awesome.